Can you hear me, Bill? Okay, thanks.
Can you hear me, Jamie?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Is Pat O'Leary on, or is he with you, Bill?
He's not on yet.
All right, I think he may be the only one we're waiting for.
Okay, sir, you're good to go. We are streaming live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we ought to go ahead and get started. On behalf of Ernie and me, I'd like to say welcome. The first thing we would like to do is thank you for your willingness to serve. I know I don't need to tell this group how important our task is of conducting a comprehensive search to identify and recommend to the full board the Institute's next superintendent. Ernie and I are co-chairs, so equal. And at this time, I wanted to ask Ernie, you got anything you'd like to say?
I'll just reiterate again, my thanks to everybody who agreed to serve because of the importance of this committee and its function. We are charting the next step that the Institute will take, and I very much appreciate everyone's willingness to join this committee and to be a part of that ultimate decision.
Before we get started, it might actually be worthwhile for all of us to give a very brief introduction, because I think that there are several of us who haven't met everyone else that's on the committee. So I'd recommend that we keep it short. I'll start and then I'll call on people as we go. I'm Jamie Inman. I'm VMI class of 86, 27-year Army veteran. I had the great good fortune to be the Institute's Chief of Staff from 2013 to 2021, and I'm on my second year on the VMI Board of Visitors. Ernie?
I'm Ernie Edgar, class of 87. I have been on the board for, this is my third year. Currently on the board, I chair the Standing Committee on Corps and Military Affairs. And before joining the Board of Visitors, I served for 9 years on the board of the VMI Research Labs, Inc., including the last 3 as its chair. Jamie, back over to you.
Thank you, sir. Admiral McKnight?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Terry McKnight, class of 1978, retired admiral, served in the Navy for 31 years, and this is my second year on the board. Thank you.
Ms. Todd?
Kate Todd, and I'm one of the Virginia resident non-alum members of the board. I came on in late 23, and I also serve on the executive committee.
Thank you, Kate. Mr. Collier?
Good afternoon, everyone. Will Collier, VMI class of 2006. I was served in the Army for 12 years. I was medically retired, and since then I've taken a variety of positions in logistics and contract management. Currently, I'm the first vice president to the Alumni Association Board of Directors. Thank you.
Will. Ms. Chambers?
Hey, I'm Laura Chambers. I'm class of 2003. I was on the VMI board starting in 2015, I guess. I served on it for 8 years, and I'm in land development. I'm now on the foundation.
Thank you. Colonel Justra?
Jim Justra, class 76, is my second year on the Board of Visitors. Spent about 25 years on and off on the alumni board. Retired lieutenant colonel, Corps of Engineers, and also retired healthcare executive.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Walton?
Virginia Mill, Jamal Walton, VMI class of 2007, current athletics director. Been working in college athletics for about 15 years. Excited to be on the committee.
Colonel Carrico?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Abby Carrico. I started with Jamie in 2013 here at VMI. I'm a French professor, and I'm in my second year as head of the Modern Languages and Cultures Department.
Thank you. Mr. Janis?
So I'm Bill Janis. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, VMI class of 84, served in the United States Navy, and I'm a graduate of University of Virginia Law School and admitted to practice in Virginia, and spent about 10 years in the Virginia General Assembly in the House of Delegates. I'm in my first year on the board.
Thank you, Bill. And I think I have this pronunciation correct. Mr. Tolliver?
Yes, I'm impressed. Thank you. Yeah, Lloyd Tolliver. I'm VMI class of 95. I served in the Navy right out of VMI and then went back to grad school and have been a combination of a banker, and I'm also currently a retired executive in the maritime business. I'm today the VP of fundraising for the VMI Foundation, and I also serve on the investment committee.
Thank you. General Strzok, sir?
Yeah, Carl Strzok. I'm the class of 70. I spent 36 years in the Army, culminating as a lieutenant general and commander of the Corps of Engineers. I then spent 8 years in the private sector with the Bechtel Corporation managing international construction. I served 4 years on the Board of Visitors, and I've been on the VMI Foundation now for about 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is Damon Williams on? Is Mr. Williams on?
He said he might be a little bit late.
Alrighty. I would like to include, thank you, everyone. That's everyone that's on the committee. I'd also like Bill and Pat to very briefly introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Wyatt. I am the secretary to the Board of Visitors, and so we'll be helping the committee along the way.
And Pat?
Yeah, I'm Pat O'Leary. I'm VMI class of 90. I am VMI's general counsel and senior assistant attorney general, and I'll be helping with the committee as well.
All right, thank you. There's really just a handful of things that we would like to get done today. One, Bill's going to give us a brief administrative support talk. Pat O'Leary is going to give us a legal briefing on some important things we need to be aware of as we enter into this. Then I will very briefly talk about process and timeline. And then really the one deliverable that we would like to get out of today's meeting is Ernie and I have a proposition for how we will select the search firm, and we would like a concurrence with that or to develop an alternate plan, and we can go either way. So I think we didn't want to postpone this meeting. I think it's important. What we're really doing today is setting the conditions to begin to gain momentum. And then we'll get to the specifics as it relates to the process and then some fidelity to the timeline after we can engage the search firm. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bill, for your administrative brief.
think you're on mute.
So what I'm showing now is the onboard dashboard for you, the individuals who are not on the Board of Visitors. You would have received an invitation yesterday. If you haven't logged in, I would encourage you to do so. The way we've set this up is each time we meet, there will be a meeting page. If you click on the meetings page, you'll see a list of the meetings. This will keep a log of all of our meetings. And then under each meeting, if you click into the meeting, you can see the agenda. Any materials that go along with the agenda items will be listed in the meetings, so you can follow along. In the resources section, we have a folder for the Superintendent Search Committee. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to populate that folder with any material that needs to be shared with the whole committee. As I upload material into that, you will get emails from onboard. So please keep an eye out for those. If those are going to your junk folder, figure out a way to keep them into your regular folder. So this is how we will maintain all of our materials and keep track of our meetings as we move forward. For members of the Board of Visitors, your screen will look a little busier than this due to your permissions within the system, but everything is there. You just might have to look a little deeper for it. The other housekeeping item, we are in the process of building a website. Our webmaster, Mary Kate, who is running the live stream right now, will be supporting us a great deal through this process, but she's building a website for us right now. So I'll be reaching out to you all individually for photos, bios, that sort of thing, if we don't already have those for you. So if you get an email from me, just please be responsive so we can get that site up and running as soon as possible. That's all I have. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'll like to hand it over to Pat for the legal briefing, please.
Sure. Bill, can you pull up my slides? And that concludes my briefing. So I just want to briefly talk about the Freedom of Information Act. Even though this is a committee meeting, it is in fact a board meeting, and it triggers all of the statutory requirements that apply to a board meeting. One of the major things that does apply to board meetings is the Freedom of Information Act. I know most of our board members are pretty familiar with it, but I'll go ahead and run through these requirements briefly. So when you're talking about FOIA, you're really talking about two requirements. One are the meeting requirements, and then the second thing are the requirements that go for requests for public records documents. So just generally speaking, a meeting requirement is triggered anytime there are 3 or more board members gathered, and that can be in person, by phone, via social media, and also a lot of people don't realize it can be triggered by email. And that, when I say email, that means rapid succession emails back and forth between individuals. For example, when somebody replies all and then somebody else replies all very quickly, that could constitute a meeting. I'll talk about the meeting requirements in a little bit more detail coming up. The other part of FOIA that we typically talk about is the request for public records. And that includes all documents used in VMI business. Now, even though everything VMI uses in its business can be considered a public record, some of those records are exempt from disclosure in FOIA, but they have to fall under one of the specific categories for exemption under the statute. What is important to realize is that pretty much any document you have, including electronic documents, can be considered a record. That would be handwritten notes, emails back and forth. Doesn't matter whether it's your personal email and your personal email account, It also includes text messages, which a lot of people don't realize. So any of those things that are sent back and forth regarding VMI business are considered public records for the purposes of FOIA. Next slide, Bill. So the meeting requirements, as a general rule, all meetings must be open to the public. And again, if you have any discussion of VMI business amongst 3 or more members outside of a noticed meeting, it constitutes an email. And as I just discussed, it constitutes a meeting. And as I just discussed, rapid succession emails back and forth could constitute a meeting as well. Meetings have to be noticed typically at least 3 work days in advance of the meeting. Bill usually takes care of that. Next slide, Bill. The board can have 2 meetings per year that are all virtual, this being one of them. In the case of non-all virtual meetings, individual board members can participate electronically by phone or other electronic means if there's a quorum physically assembled in one location and there's proper notice. You can also be excused from a meeting, or in other words, allowed to participate in a meeting electronically for a personal matter 2 times a year. And if it's a medical condition, it's an unlimited number of times per year. And again, this pertains to board members. Next slide, Bill. So there will be times, I'm assuming in this committee, that there will be closed sessions. In order to have a closed session of a meeting, in other words, there is not public participation, the subject matter that's being discussed has to fall under one of the exceptions noted in Virginia Code 2.23711. And there are more than 40 of them. For example, some of them are personnel matters, scholastic records pertaining to cadets, legal advice, gifts and bequests, special awards, and honorary degrees. Next slide, Bill. So in order to go into a closed session meeting, there has to be a detailed motion to go into the session. The statutory citation for the specific exemption has to be cited. The general topic has to be noted, and then the specific subject matter under that general topic has to be noted as well. Now, once the board is in closed session, only those matters identified in the motion that was made in the open session can be discussed during the closed session. That's kind of where I play a role. I try to, as best I can, keep the board on track and make sure that they're only discussing those matters. When the board reconvenes, there's a motion to come out of closed session. Then in open session, there's a vote to certify that only those matters identified in the motion to go into closed session were discussed, and that's a roll call vote. Next slide, Bill. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the Conflicts of Interest Act, basically personal interest. The general rule is if a board member has a personal interest in a matter that is the subject of action by the board, and they may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit or detriment as a result of the action or matter, they have to disqualify themselves from the board or the action. Next slide. Here's the basic definition of a personal interest. Essentially, it's a board member or a member of your immediate family which may have a salary of more than $5,000 annually, or an ownership interest in a business or property that exceeds 3% of the asset value. Next slide. Conflicts of interest, it's important to note that they set a minimum standard, and you have to avoid, as board members, even the appearance of an impropriety as required by the VMI Code of Ethics. So I want to point out that everything I've discussed so far applies to board members, and I know in this committee we have some other individuals that are participating. So their role, if you're not a board member, you are technically considered an advisor to the board. So with regard to the document requests and FOIA documents, anything you produce as part of this that's used by the board would be a public record and subject to FOIA. So I'd like you to just be cognizant of that going forward with this committee. The other thing is, although the Conflict of Interest Act doesn't specifically apply to you because you're not a board member, if you as an advisor feel that there's something that could create a conflict of interest on your part, I'd appreciate it if you just reach out to me directly and we can discuss it and decide how best to go forward, because we want to be as transparent as possible in these proceedings going forward. Now, if anybody has any questions with regard to this, please just reach out to me directly. Since we are an open session, I don't want to get in a situation where I'm dispensing legal advice during the open session. So if you do have any questions, just reach out to me directly and we can discuss your matter. But that's all I have.
Any questions for Pat? I would say the spirit that I think we should all aspire to is that as we progress those things that need to remain confidential, we should make sure they remain confidential, and everything else that we can, we should share with the different constituencies that may have an interest in being open and transparent as we absolutely can be. Thank you very much, Pat. Bill, would you bring the slides back up?
Yes, sir. And I will point out that you all, for those non-board members, you received a confidentiality agreement. I've received some of those back. If the others who have not filled that out yet could send that back, we'll send them over to the co-chairs to have them sign and fully executed.
Yeah, let me just touch on that briefly, Bill. I did draft that confidentiality agreement. It's specifically for people who are not board members or not employees of VMI, because there are certain matters that would be discussed in the closed session of this committee, which are going to be kept confidential. So we'd like to have that agreement. The board members and VMI employees already have a duty of confidentiality as it pertains to those closed session meetings. Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, I'll cover our desired timeline, briefly discuss search firms, make a recommendation to solicit your support for how we will vet and choose the search firm, and then I'll leave for you to peruse on your own some best practices that have been given to boards that are selecting leaders within educational institutions, generally sourced out of either the Harvard Business Review or the Chronicle of Higher Education. Next slide, please. The initial steps are really already underway. We've established committee membership. Bill Wyatt and his team will provide administrative support. We have a very draft, I would say aspirational, tentative timeline. And the biggest due-out we have, again, is the way forward on selecting the search firm. Next slide, please. Once we have a search firm selected, they will help us in tandem with us conduct these things, meet with relevant constituencies to gather input. We'll have listening sessions, surveys with faculty, staff, cadets, alumni, and community members. And then those other tasks there will follow. So really the first order of business is to get a search firm selected. Next slide, please. Very simply said, ideally, we would like to have the next superintendent named by the 1st of August. But what's more important than that timeline is making sure that we take the time that we need to ensure that we do absolutely everything that we need to do between now and then to ensure that we have a comprehensive, fair process and identify the best individual to lead VMI forward. So I'm going to reference these phases on here, and I don't think they'll change hugely, but they may. So phase 1 is what we're in now, where we're selecting the search committee and setting the conditions for the rest of the phases. We'll post the advertisement and do some recruiting in April. In May, we'll begin to screen. When we get a firmed up timeline, I'll plug in there when we think the committee meetings are going to be so you can plan around your schedules. In June, we'll schedule and conduct interviews. July, we'll do follow-up business with a goal of having the successor named by the 1st of August. Ernie, is there anything you'd like to cover on this?
I agree with you that absolutely this is aspirational, and as we get the search firm on board, that the timelines will clarify. Although neither Jamie nor I expect a whole lot of movement to the overall end date. But what I would also say is we're looking at potentially having a meeting on the books in a couple of weeks, just as a placeholder, where depending on the outcome of our discussion here today on search firms, by that time we'll hopefully have the search firm selected, and we can update the committee and progress to the next steps from there. So one of our due outs today is to have something notional to get back together in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jamie, question from Bill Janis.
Sure, Bill.
So this is for Pat O'Leary. I want to make sure I understood what you said correctly about the open meeting requirements. Because there are more than 3 board members on this search committee, I understood you to say that every time we have a meeting, that counts as a meeting of the board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I understand that there's a limit to how many virtual meetings we can have in a year. Does that limit apply to the search committee as well?
It does.
So bottom line, how many meetings can we have virtually before we run up against that limit and have to do everything else with in-person meetings?
We've already run up against that limit. So a board is allowed to have 2 public meetings fully virtual per year, or 50%, whichever is greater. So the more meetings we have, the more virtual meetings we have available to us. The other caveat is that it can't be consecutive virtual meetings. So the next meeting of the board cannot be a virtual meeting. And so depending on what that meeting may be, whether it's a committee meeting or a full board meeting or the Superintendent Search Committee meeting, that meeting cannot be virtual.
Follow-up question, Jamie. So my understanding also, though, is that as long as you get a quorum of members in one place physically, then that doesn't count as a virtual meeting. So if you got, I guess a quorum would be half plus 1. So you'd have to have 9 members in one place. The rest of the members could dial in. Is that correct? Or is it a quorum against the composition of this committee?
A public meeting is constituted of 3 members. So if 3 members are located in the same place, that constitutes a public meeting. And others can tune in virtually. Other board members can tune in virtually, provided they have one of those 4 reasons that's spelled out in the statute. One of them is being 60 or more miles away from the meeting, health reasons, etc.
So we could conceivably have, last question, Jim. We could conceivably have 4 of the board members of this committee dialing in remotely, so long as 3 of the board members are physically located in the same place, contemporaneous. Is that correct?
Well, the requirement is a quorum located in one place, right?
So we'd have to have at least 4 people in one place.
That's right.
But the quorum is against the composition of this committee, not against the composition of the entire Board of Visitors.
That's my understanding.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I won't read these for you. I'm sorry?
Clarification, the quorum is consistent of the board members on the committee, not the addition of the 7.
Correct. Correct. It only
board
pertains to the board
on
members.
the committee, not the membership.
Okay, we good on that topic? Was that you, Ernie? Somebody was coming in choppy.
Yeah, that was me. Apologies.
All right. I'm not going to read these. It kind of lays out some of the positive aspects of going with a search firm. Next slide, please. We've had 4 search firms make loose proposals to us: Greenwood, Asher, Parker, Bufkin, Baker, and Myers McRae. Ernie and I have looked at their initial materials. I think we believe that we should vet more thoroughly 3, Greenwood, Asher, Baker, and Myers, McRae. Speaking for me, I think any of these search firms would be fine. I think what we need to do is interview and vet them to determine who on their team is going to represent them for us. One of them's a little less expensive than the other 2. I think that we can negotiate some price, but I think what's much more important to that is that they're a good fit. So what Ernie and I were going to recommend to the committee that we do is we'll interview and vet those 3 different firms, make a decision on who to employ, and then come back to you once that decision's been met with a little bit more specificity on the timeline, the process, and what they're specifically going to do for us. But before we did that, before you delegate us to be able to do that, we wanted to see if there are any members of the committee that have an issue with that.
Just a question, Jamie. So it's Bill Janis. Which was Myers McRae the firm that was used in the last superintendent search?
No, it was Whit Kiefer's who was used in the last one. Myers McRae happened to be the one that was used by the Citadel, and I think they've also done North Georgia.
Right.
Maybe not at the president level, but at some level.
That's why I recognize the name. Second question, do we know if any of these firms have any alumni working in the firm?
I do not know. I have read the 4 where they have executive level leadership, and I don't believe any of them are VMI grads, and I'm not sure any of them have extensive military experience. Ernie, did you see the same thing?
I saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One question, Jamie, Jim Juster here. Vetting process, could you describe that briefly?
I'm going to turn that over to Ernie, but we have discussed it. Yeah, Ernie.
Yeah, so we've received 3 full proposals or proposals from the 3 firms that we want to talk to. And so the next step would be to interview them, understand who on their team would be leading the search, get some better depth on their experience, both for colleges and universities in the Commonwealth, both public and private, as well as senior military colleges, and then explore a little more deeply their process, and then understand from that how that aligns with our timeline. I think those are the principal considerations. And then based on what we're hearing, then Jamie and I can make a decision about who seems to fit our needs the best.
I would assume you'll also look and see if they're currently engaged in any litigation.
Yes, we can absolutely add that question to the list.
Yeah, that would be good. And the other thing I'd look at is if they've been in the news at all, any media coverage that's affected them. That's it.
Anyone else have anything else on this particular topic? Okay, well, thank you. I think Ernie and I'll aim to interview and vet these 3 firms by the end of next week, and then aim to have one selected at that time, and then come back to you within 2 weeks with a little more robust timeline. And we do have a 4-page Word document that lays out the process a little bit more in a little bit more detail than we've shared today. I'll ask Bill Wyatt to post that on Onboard. We'll just put a big draft on it and a tentative, but it gives you enough data so it can lend some clarity to the way the process will work. I think this first meeting was not quite as collaborative as the following meetings will be. So we'll make sure that we post this process up on Onboard. We'll provide some good feedback from the selection process and the feedback we get from and anything we learn in the interview process with the search firms, and come back to you in a couple of weeks. And then I also hope that we can have scheduled meetings into the future. We'll do the best that we can to do that as early as we can, so all of you can plan your personal and business requirements around when these meetings are going to be. And unless that's all that I had that I wanted to conduct at this first meeting, Ernie and I didn't want to wait. This is going to enable us to begin to set the conditions for the remainder of the search and I appreciate the time that you've shared with us today. Does anybody, Ernie, anything you'd like to say, or does anybody have anything they'd like to share before we adjourn the meeting?
So
Nothing further from my part other than thanks everybody for being a part of the committee, and I'll leave open the floor for questions.
one question, Bill Janice. In the interim, until we have the process established, I'm not sure if you're fielding phone calls from people that are interested or prospective candidates. How do you want to handle that? And do you want them referred to someone, or do you want them to tell them to just keep their powder dry until we post the process?
My thought, unless anyone differs from it, is that we just have them forward it to Bill Wyatt. And when we get, if you have the email, Bill, that you want it sent to, that if you can share that with the committee. And then I just think we ought to, our answers should be standard. Thank you very much. Submit your data to the email that Bill will share with us. Anybody have any issues with that? Was Mr. Williams able to join us?
Yes, I'm on, guys.
We did a really quick round robin, just where we did very brief 2 or 3 sentence introductions, Damon, and I didn't want to leave you out of that.
That's fine. That's fine. Again, Damon, class of 90. Most of you I've seen, obviously, board members, and some of the staff. Looking forward to this process. I'm from Roanoke. And so hopefully we all can work together and move this thing forward.
Thank you, Damon.
Thank you.
Jamie and Ernie, is what I might put a plug in for, we don't have to do it on this call, is if we could just prospectively put in some placeholders for meetings. And I personally am always happy if a meeting then, we figure out that's not going to work and we take it off. But I'm just wondering if it might make sense to just prophylactically put numerous meetings in places as targets that we're sort of trying to hit. And then people can at least have something that they're surrounding some protection in their calendars for. But I just, again, not for this call, but I'd put in a plug for that. And then we can always take them down.
We will do that, and we'll do it as quickly as we can. Anyone else have anything at all?
Hey, Jamie, this is Terry. On the search committee, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. Before we reach the final conclusion, can we just get, the A's, B's, and C's, why this search firm was, more advantageous for us than the other firm? Just so we can just have a mindset on why they were picked over the other one.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that. What I would ask is, that we get a relatively quick turn on it. So
Sure,
Ernie,
no problem. Yeah.
Ernie and I'll share absolutely everything. And if there's, and then we'll certainly let you know why we recommend or why we went with the one that we did before we select it. And as long as we get a quick turn, I don't think there's any issue with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything. I understand it. Yep.
Jamie, could you say the 3 again? Because I saw the 4, but I'm not sure which was the one you didn't want to consider.
Yeah, it was, can we go back to that slide? I've got it right here. Hold on.
I believe Parker was the one
you didn't want.
Yep.
Yeah, Parker's the only one you don't want.
Thank you.
All right, unless anyone has anything else, we'll adjourn the meeting, and I thank all of you for your time.
Thank you, everybody. Bill, do I need to get back in touch with Jamie to join back in?
I'll text him.
Okay.